My dad ignored me on my birthday, so I returned the favor. My mom passed away when I was 15, and my little brother Cody was 10. And from that day on, I became the mother in that house without anyone ever asking me if I wanted to. I cooked. I did the grocery runs. I drove Cody to school, to practice, to the dentist, to every appointment on the calendar, because our dad worked long hours and said he could not be in two places at once. I did not complain, because someone had to do it. My dad, though, walked around like he was doing all of it himself. Every time a neighbor told him what a great single father he was, he soaked it up and said, "You just do what you have to do for your kids." He never once mentioned that the person doing most of it was me. And while I was held to a standard nobody could meet, Cody could do no wrong. If Cody left dishes in the sink, that was fine. If I left one cup, I got a lecture about respect. When I made honor roll, he barely looked up. When Cody scraped by, my dad took us out to celebrate and told everyone how proud he was. Last year, that double standard hit its peak. Cody had a dentist appointment, and I was supposed to take him. I got ready, went to wake him, and he would not get out of bed. We missed it. My dad decided this was my fault, and he gave me the silent treatment for a full week. That week included my 19th birthday. He walked past me at the counter on my birthday morning and said nothing. No card, no happy birthday, nothing. All because a 14-year-old would not get up. I let it go, because I always let it go. Then this year came Father's Day. I did not say anything to him, and a few days later he brought it up. He said, "Friends of mine all around the world messaged me. My own daughter under my own roof said nothing." I said, "You didn't wish me a happy birthday." He looked at me and said, "Is that why?" I said, "Possibly." He shook his head and said, "If something from a year ago is why you can't wish your own father a happy Father's Day, somebody should be scared of you." So I asked him. I said, "How come you get to hold things against me for a whole week, but the second I do it, it's a problem?" He said, "When did I ever do that?" I reminded him about my birthday, the silent treatment, the dentist. He waved it off and said Cody was young and it was my job to get him up. I said, "How come your hurt feelings are valid and mine are not? Am I not a person too?" And he looked right at me and said, "We are not equal." He said it in a calm voice. "Not you're being disrespectful, not you'll understand when you're older. We are not equal." I sat with that for a day. Then I decided that if we were not equal, I would stop acting like his partner in running that house. The next morning he called out that Cody needed a ride at 10 and I needed to drop him. I said, "That's not mine to do. He's your son." My dad stopped and said, "Excuse me?" I said, "You told me we are not equal. Equals share the load, so he's your job now, not mine." He scoffed and said, "You live here? You help." I said I would help with my own things, and I did. I made my own dinner and did not make his. He stood at the cold stove and said, "So this is how you're going to be." I told him this was how he had said it was. For the next 2 weeks he found out exactly what I had been carrying. He missed a work call because he had to leave early to get Cody from practice. He forgot Cody had a checkup, and the office charged him for the missed slot. He ran out of groceries and stood in front of an empty fridge at 9 at night, genuinely confused about how it got that way. Cody started complaining to him that he was always late, that there was never any food, that nothing got done, and for the first time Cody aimed all of that at Dad instead of at me. My dad's answer was to get angry at me. He said, "You're being cold. You're punishing this whole family." I told him I was not punishing anyone. I was just not doing two people's jobs for a man who told me I was beneath him. He called his mother, my grandmother Lorraine, and put her on me. She called and said, "Your father does so much for you. The least you can do is help with your brother." I asked her when my father had ever driven Cody anywhere himself. She went quiet, then said that was not the point. My dad tried every angle. Anger, then guilt, then acting wounded, then reminding me it was his house and his rules. None of it worked, because none of it changed the one thing he had said. Every time he pushed, I told him the same simple thing. If we are not equal, then I am not the second parent here. He could not argue with his own words. About 3 weeks in, he came to me looking tired, because he had been getting up at 6 to do the drop-offs he never used to do. And he said, "Okay, I need your help with your brother. Can we go back to how it was?" No apology. I almost felt bad for him, and that scared me, because feeling bad for Kurt was exactly how I ended up running his household for 4 years. I told myself tired is not the same as sorry. I said, "Not unless you apologize for what you said to me." He didn't yell. He walked over and pulled out a chair at the table and sat down. He rubbed his face with both hands, slow, and for a second I thought this might be it. He leaned back and said, "Look, I know things have been hard on you." My heart jumped, but the next sentence was not an apology. He leaned forward, put his hands flat on the table and said, "But you have to understand, I have been busting my back for years, so you and Cody can have a roof. You think I don't sacrifice?" And just like that, it flipped. It was about the money now, the bills, the long hours, the job he dragged himself to. He wanted me to feel guilty for not giving him credit, as if I had ever once said he didn't work hard. That was never the point. The point was what came out of his mouth when he told me I was less than him, but he couldn't sit with that, so he pulled out the paycheck like a shield. I shook my head and said, "I'm not talking about money. I'm talking about you telling me we are not equal. Take that back." I kept my voice steady. I didn't want to give him a reason to call me emotional. His face changed. The tired look was gone. He said, "You are hanging on to one sentence, and you're willing to let this whole house fall apart over it." I almost laughed because it was so predictable. He really believed that if I forgot 4 words, everything would be fine, and we could go back to me doing everything while he took the credit. He didn't understand that those 4 words didn't create the problem. They just showed me the one that was already there. So I held firm. I said, "That sentence told me exactly how you see me. You don't get to unsay it by pretending it didn't matter." I watched his jaw work. Then he stood up fast, shoved the chair back hard enough to scrape the floor, and said, "Fine. You want to play it like that? You can start paying rent. You're 20 years old. If you're not going to help, you can pay your share." The little flicker of hope I'd felt got snuffed out. He'd gone from guilt to a money threat in 2 minutes. He couldn't say sorry, so instead he was going to make me pay for standing up for myself. That was when Cody walked in. He came around the corner with his phone in his hand, felt the tension, and stopped. He looked at Kurt, then at me. He said, "What's going on?" And Kurt, without missing a beat, turned to Cody and said, "Your sister has decided she doesn't want to be part of this family anymore." I watched Cody's face go from confused to hurt in half a second. He didn't know the full story. He didn't know what Kurt had said to me. All he knew was that things used to work, and now they didn't. And his dad had just told him it was because of me. Kurt had an audience now, and he was performing, making himself the overwhelmed father and me the selfish daughter. He put his hand on Cody's shoulder and walked him toward toward the living room, like he was protecting him from me. I stood there alone and thought about how good Kurt was at this. He couldn't remember an appointment, but he could flip a story faster than anyone I had ever met. That night, I heard Cody on the phone with Lorraine, and I knew round 2 was coming. She called the next evening. This time her voice was soft. She said, "Sweetheart, I lost my daughter-in-law too. I know how much you miss your mother, but your mother would want you to take care of your family." I closed my eyes, because she wasn't wrong that I missed Maya. I missed her every single day. But missing my mom and letting my dad walk all over me were two different things, and Lorraine was tying them together like the same rope. Then I asked her the thing I'd been wanting to ask. I said, "Did Dad tell you what he said to me? The exact words?" There was a pause. She said, "He told me you two had a disagreement." I almost laughed. A disagreement. I said, "He told me we are not equal." Those were his words. Did he mention that part? The line went quiet. Not thinking quiet. The kind of quiet where someone just heard something they weren't ready for. I counted the seconds. 1, 2, 3. And in that silence, I knew Kurt had not told her. He'd given her just enough to make me look bad, and left out the words that started all of it, because even he knew how they sounded out loud. When Lorraine spoke again, she'd recovered, but I heard the crack. She said, "Men say stupid things when they're stressed. Your grandfather said worse to me, and I didn't stop cooking dinner." All I heard was a woman telling me to swallow the same thing she had swallowed. So I said, "And how did that work out for you?" It landed hard. She said, "That is not the same thing, and you know it." But it was, and I think she knew it too. Then I told her the truth, plain and simple. I said, "I have been doing the cooking since I was 15. The driving, the groceries, Cody's appointments, the cleaning, every single day for almost 5 years. And not once has Dad thanked me. Not once has he said my name when he talks about everything that gets done around here. He told his friends he does it all himself." I said it the way you read a list, because that is what it was. Lorraine was quiet, but a different kind of quiet. Not shock. The quiet of someone hearing something they already suspected but never wanted to confirm. Then she said, "I'll talk to him." That was it. I sat there on my bed after the call and just breathed, because for the first time since all of this started, Lorraine had not told me I was wrong. But the hardest part didn't come from Kurt, or from Lorraine. It came a couple nights later, when there was a soft knock on my door, and it was Cody. He walked over and sat on the edge of my bed and picked at a thread on my blanket, and then he said, "I don't understand why you won't just help Dad. He's really struggling." And that hit me 10 times harder than anything Kurt had thrown at me, because this wasn't Kurt putting words in his mouth. This was my little brother, honestly confused, wanting his house to feel normal again, asking his big sister to make it happen, because that was all he had ever known. I said, "Dad said something really hurtful to me, and instead of apologizing, he wants me to pretend it didn't happen. I can't do that." Cody said, "But everything was fine before. Why can't it just go back to normal?" And I said, "Because normal meant I did everything and nobody noticed." He was quiet, turning it over, because I don't think he had ever thought about what normal looked like from my side. Then he got really quiet and said, "Sometimes I feel like you're more mad at me than at Dad, like you're tired of taking care of me." My chest got so tight I could barely breathe, because that was the one thing I never wanted him to think. I put my hand on his arm and said, "I am never tired of you. I am tired of being told it doesn't count." He started to cry, and I pulled him in and held him, and for a second I almost gave in. Not for Kurt, but for Cody, because it would have been so easy to walk downstairs and say I'd start again and make his crying stop. But then I thought about what he would learn if I did, that when someone tells you that you are less than them, you accept it, that some people's feelings matter and some don't. I didn't want that lesson passed to him, so I held him tighter and said, "I love you, but I need Dad to treat me like a person. That's going to be better for all of us, including you." He nodded, small, not convinced, just tired and young, and he went back to his room. That conversation almost ended everything. If he'd pushed one more minute, I might have caved, but it was that near miss that made me sure I couldn't. The next few days were strange. Kurt barely spoke to me. No yelling, no guilt, no rent threat. He was quiet in a way I had never seen, and something was building. It came on a Sunday morning. I was at the stove making myself eggs, the pan warm, the edges just setting, not thinking about the standoff, just trying to have a quiet morning for once. He didn't stomp in. He walked over and leaned against the counter a few feet from me with his arms crossed, and I could feel him watching. Then he said it, in a voice I had never heard from him, not angry, cold and flat and steady, like he'd rehearsed it. He said, "Your mother would be ashamed of you." I froze. The spatula hovered over the eggs. I turned around slowly and said, "What did you just say?" And he said it again, slower, like he wanted every word to hit. "Maya raised you better than this. If she could see how you're treating your own father, she would be heartbroken." He said it like a fact, like a ruling off a piece of paper. My hands started shaking, not from fear, from the sheer cruelty of it. He had picked up my dead mother's name and swung it at me because he knew it was the one spot where I had no armor. Maya was gone, 5 years gone, and he used her anyway. I looked at him standing there so sure of himself, and something in me went still. He was out of moves. He'd tried asking nicely, guilt, the rent, turning Cody against me, and now he was using my dead mom because it was all he had left. My voice came out low and steady. I said, "Mom would be ashamed of a man who made his 15-year-old daughter replace his wife, and then told her she wasn't even his equal." His jaw tightened. He had not expected me to throw it back, and he definitely had not expected me to use her name better than he did. He straightened off the counter and said, "I never made you do anything. You stepped up because that's what family does." There it was, the rewrite, the version where he didn't push a grieving kid into running a household, where I just chose it. I said, "I stepped up because no one else would, and instead of thanking me, you told me I was beneath you." He opened his mouth to find the next angle, but before he could, I heard it. The creak of a shoe on the floor, the kind of small sound you only catch when the whole house is dead quiet. I turned toward the doorway, and Kurt turned at the same time, and standing right there was Lorraine. She was supposed to come for lunch. I had forgotten, and from his face, so had he. She'd let herself in with the spare key she kept, and from the look on her face she had been standing there long enough. She had heard him. She had heard Kurt say Maya's name. She had heard everything. Lorraine was not a woman who showed much on her face, but right now there was no hiding it. Her mouth was a hard line, her eyes aimed directly at her son. She did not look at me. She looked at Kurt, only at Kurt, and she said, in a voice quiet but heavy, "Curtis, you did not just use that girl's dead mother against her in my hearing." Every drop of color left his face. His mouth opened and nothing came out. He had not expected an audience. He had not expected anyone to hear the lowest thing he had ever said, and he definitely definitely had not expected his own mother to be the one standing in the doorway when he said it, because he couldn't unsay it now. He couldn't spin it or call her later with the watered-down version. She had the real version, heard raw, with her own ears, and it was written all over her face what she thought of it. He had forgotten the one rule every manipulator should know: never perform your worst moment in front of a witness. Lorraine walked in, pulled out a chair at the table the way you'd pull one out at a business meeting, sat, straightened her back, and said, "Sit down, Curtis." He didn't move. She said it again, slower, "Sit down, Curtis." And he sat, lowering himself like his legs didn't want to bend. I stayed standing by the stove. Lorraine folded her hands and said, "Tell me what you said to this girl. The thing about not being equal. I want to hear you say it to my face." Kurt ran a hand across his neck and leaned forward, pulling on the same playbook, the one where he softened it until he was the victim. He said, "Ma, it was taken out of context. I was frustrated. I said something I shouldn't have." Lorraine didn't blink. She said, "So you admit you shouldn't have said it?" His eyes flicked to the side. He said, "I'm saying it came out wrong." She tilted her head and said, "Then what did you mean? Explain what we are not equal means in the right context, because I've been thinking about it since that girl told me on the phone, and I cannot find one." The room went quiet. His lips moved like they were forming a word, but nothing came. He looked at the table, at his hands, everywhere except at us, because there was no answer. There was no version of "we are not equal" that a father could say to his daughter and have it mean something decent. He knew it, she knew it, and the silence said it louder than words. Then Lorraine turned to me. Her face softened just a little. She said, "How long have you been doing the cooking in this house?" I said, "Since I was 15. She nodded. "The driving?" I said, "Since I got my license." She kept going, steady, brick by brick. "The groceries, the appointments, the cleaning?" I said, "All of it." She turned back to Kurt, her face hard again, and said, "And you told people you were doing all of this yourself?" He sat up straighter and said, "I never said that." And that was when I spoke. I didn't yell. I said it flat, the way you quote something from memory. I said, "You told the neighbors. You just do what you have to do for your kids. You never once said my name." Lorraine's mouth pressed into a thin line. I had known this woman my whole life, and I knew what that look meant. It meant she had just confirmed something she had been afraid was true. She said, "Curtis, I raised you by myself after your father left. I know what it means to do everything alone, and I know what it looks like when somebody else is doing it for you." She paused, and the pause felt heavy. Then she said, "That girl has been your wife without the title. She has been running your house, raising your son, and you repaid her by telling her she is less than you. And then you used Maya. In what world is that something a father does?" Kurt's eyes were red, wet at the edges. His hands were clasped so tight his knuckles were white, and he was not speaking, because there was nothing to say. Every angle, every spin, Lorraine had cut through all of it and laid the truth out like a receipt he couldn't argue with. Then I heard a small sound from the hallway. Cody was standing there in his pajamas, drawn out by the voices, arms wrapped around himself, watching. He didn't come in. He just stood there with wide eyes, and I could see on his face that he understood. Maybe not all of it, but enough, that this was real, that it was not me who needed to fix it. Lorraine looked at Kurt one more time and said, "You owe this girl an apology. A real one. Not, 'I'm sorry you feel that way.' You look at your daughter, and you tell her you were wrong." Then she sat back and waited. I stood by the stove and watched him. I didn't push. I just waited, the way I had been waiting for years without knowing I was waiting. Kurt sat there a long time, head down, shoulders up near his ears. Then his chin dipped, his shoulders dropped, and he said, in a voice pulled out of him from somewhere he'd kept locked, "I'm sorry." 2 words. I waited, because 2 words were not enough, and I think he knew, because he looked up at me with wet eyes and said, "You carried this family. I see that. I should have said it every day and I didn't. And what I said to you is the worst thing I've ever said to anyone. You are not beneath me. You never were. I just couldn't look at what I wasn't doing, so I pretended you weren't doing it either." Nothing moved. I heard a choked sound from the hallway and Cody was crying, real crying, hand over his mouth, and I knew he wasn't crying because he was sad. He was crying because he finally understood the weight I'd been carrying and the way Kurt had let me carry it. Lorraine nodded once, slow, like a judge accepting a verdict. I looked at Kurt with tears on his face and felt something shift in my chest. Not forgiveness, not yet. Something lighter, like putting down a bag you'd carried so long you forgot how heavy it was. I set the spatula down. I didn't hug him. I didn't tell him it was okay, because it wasn't. Not yet, but it was heard. I said, "Thank you. That's all I needed." I walked toward the doorway and touched Cody's shoulder as I passed. A small squeeze and kept walking. The eggs were still on the stove, black now, smoking a little. Nobody had turned off the burner. I went back, clicked it off, scraped the burnt eggs into the trash, and cracked 2 more into the cold pan for myself.